So, hello all. I'm sure it has been quite a while. I've not posted anything on this channel for some time. So, I just thought I should come on here to tell you guys about what I've been reading and what has been going on. Basically, about all that I have been able to read or consume book wise in the month of July. So, I hope you guys have been reading and do drop in the comments. Tell me about what you have been reading, both fiction and non fiction. So, but before I go on, please subscribe to support the channel, drop your comments, and then you can share the video for adventure if it catches your fancy. So, I'll just get right to it and tell you guys about all that I've been able to read. And in the month of July, I'm happy to report that I only read one physical book. The remaining, I read 5 books in total, 4 of them audio, and one of them is a physical book. And the physical book, as you get to know as you watch the video, is not a very easy book to read. It's a non-fiction book, a biographical study, so to say, about classical music. So it is not an easy book to read, but I plowed through it and then I really learned a lot. So in order to compensate for that, I listened to 4 audiobooks and I really, really enjoyed the books. So if you're interested to hear about all the books I was able to read in the month of July, stay tuned. So first off, watching bookish content online, I always hear about people talking about Anne of Green Gables and the series and all that. How some people always show excitement when they come across the books and how they are looking forward to getting into it. So I had access to an audio copy of Anne of Green Gables and I was like, wow, I've been hearing so much about this book. Let me dive into it. So I got it and then started listening to it. And it's, and let me just say, how would I say, it did not meet my expectations. It's not as if it was a bad book. But the way people were talking about it, I went in with the expectation that it was something that was unheard of, something that had never been done before. The way people are always talking about it. I understand that it is a childhood classic, or for some people maybe from the West. So, but it did not meet my expectation, but I enjoyed it, especially Anne's dialogue. And the narrator really took that book to another height. The way he narrates Anne's dialogue, it was very, very entertaining. I could laughed and laughed and laughed. It was a fun time actually, but I was expecting more, but I really enjoyed it. If I had gone into that book without having heard anything about it, it would have been a straight 5-star read for me. I enjoyed it, and it's a book I look forward to reading with the children. So, for those of you that have never heard Anne of Green Gables, it is actually a series. So, it follows a young orphan. I think her name is Anne Shelley. So, this one that I read is just the first part in the series. That's the one that's called Anne of Green Gables. The other ones have other names, Anne of this or Anne of that. But this first one tells us how Anne basically began, will I say began life. I think she's an orphan of 11, and then she mistakenly, as it were, gets adopted by this family of brother and sister. And then basically follows her journey of growing up, coming of age, and all that. It was very, very interesting, and I really enjoyed reading Anne of Green Gables. And then one thing that I basically took away from Anne of Green Gables is that living in the moment. I really got that from that book. Living in the moment, expressing yourself, it goes a long way to make life livable, make life more manageable for us, not holding back things, not holding in things. So that was my takeaway from reading Anne of Green Gables. It was not a very long book. I think the audiobook was just a little above 2 hours, but I really, really enjoyed it. And it really reminded me of, that was why I said he didn't really meet my expectations, because I had already read Matilda by Rodal, which is basically sort of, they are very, very similar in that you have this vivacious young child who is gifted in some way and is not really afraid to express herself. So I think Rodal did something like that with Matilda. And I think Matilda was even made into a movie. I've not heard of Anne of Green Gables being made into a movie. I don't know if there is, but I've heard that Matilda, there's a movie about Matilda. So that was Anne of Green Gables for you. So the second audiobook I listened to in the month of July was or is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What really drew me to this book, number one, was the title. The way this one is described as Dr. Jekyll and this one is described as Mr. Hyde. And guys, it was one book that I really enjoyed. Number one, it reads like poetry. It flows. I don't know how the writer did it. It reads as if you are reading a continuous poem. The descriptions and the same thing also happened with the descriptions of nature and the environment and basically setting the tone or the mood for the scenes. The same thing with Anne of Green Gables, but The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde reads like poetry. I had to listen again and again and again and again. It was very, very lulling and it was very, very entertaining, especially when Dr. Jekyll was telling his story, talking about what motivated him to do the things that he did. So basically, you would think that the story is about two people, but I think it is what in today's age would be described as, will I say, bipolar disorder, as they understood it back then. So it follows the story of Dr. Jekyll, basically, who found a way to transform, to basically, will I say, divide his personality into two, and found a way to will I say, transform himself from one personality to another. Basically divided himself into his good parts and his bad parts. So there is a drug that he will take, and then he will be in his good part, which is Dr. Jekyll, and then when he takes the drug again, his bad part becomes manifest, and then his bad part will now go around the village or around the neighborhood, basically doing mean and evil things. And then when he does such things, he transforms back to his good parts, and then nobody can basically trace who this other guy is. So it was a very, very intriguing read. And then it was in the mode of like a mystery, in the mode of Sherlock Holmes and all that. So, and I was not expecting that when I went. It was a very, very clever, just as I said before, from the name, you think the book is about two people, but then you'll be surprised at what you end up reading. And then the prose, as I said before, it flowed like honey, like poetry. I like the way the prose was, the way the sentences sound. It was a very, very entertaining read. Sometimes I even forgot to follow the story. I was just listening to the way the words were flowing. That is to tell you how entertaining it was. So that was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the second audiobook that I listened to. So going to the audiobook number 3, I listened to White Nights. Nights as in Night. When you hear the name, you think white as a night with K, no? White Nights. So I've heard a lot and lots, especially on Instagram, about Dostoyevsky and how it is that we must read his works and all that. I think he's a Russian writer, or his works are translated works from the Russian language or something like that. And I have this thing about works that are translated especially from Russia. I don't know how they sound to me. I don't know. I don't know if it is. I don't, it's not only his work. There was another one. There's another work again that was translated from, and there is a way it begins to sound once it is translated into English. And this White Knights, basically the dialogue. That is it. That is what's the dialogue. The way they converse is not the way English speakers normally. To me, how will I put it? It's they say, oh my God, is it that they say whatever is in their mind or whatever comes to their mind at the spur of the moment? That is the way I feel. There is no, we have a censorship or something. I cannot. I don't just know. I don't know if any other person has noticed that with works, especially that are translated from Russian. So it basically follows this young man that I think he doesn't like the life that he's living. And true to what was said, Dostoevsky is not for everybody. It is not for everybody. You really have to put your mind to it in order to read it and even to get the gist of what is even happening at times. So this young man, I can't remember his name right now, he doesn't like the life that he's living at the moment. So, but then in this process, as his life is going on, he gets 3 nights of, will I say, excitement, which is basically the white nights. So, in other words, his life is basically a series of blackness. Then he gets this opportunity of a white or an exciting night, 3 exciting nights in the person of a young woman whom he meets and then, let's say, falls in love with or basically becomes acquainted with. So that is basically the premise of the story of White Night. I think it's a novella, a short story, something like that. White Night by Dostoyevsky. That is the third audiobook that I listened to in the month of July. So moving on to the next book. I've never actually heard of this book anywhere, but I came across it. The Cook of Aldwych Hall. So this book basically follows a cook who is newly employed in a household because the former cook has died after a long tenure of service in the house. And then this old cook kept a notebook where she basically wrote her recipes, her special recipes, and things about the house that should be of benefit to the new cook. So the new cook comes in, and then she takes over, and then she begins to read the notebook. And then in the notebook, she basically gets to see, how will I say, the things that make that house thick and makes the running of that house as per the kitchen or as per food very, very attainable or very easy. So it's actually a, will I say, a lesson in, will I say, human relations and empathy, because this cook that was there before basically set out to study each and every character in that home, find out their character, find out how she could be of help to them. And this book basically explores the theme that food is indeed medicine, both for the body and for the soul. So she talks about how she was able, or the former cook was able to, like, basically help people uplift themselves emotionally or bring them out of the doldrums or from whatever it is that is ailing them, basically with food or with a special recipe. As I said before, working on the premise that food basically is medicine, both for the body and for the soul. So this former cook basically wrote down these recipes in her book, the special recipes in her book, and then kept it for for the next cook that was to come. So, and then in the way that she did it was that somebody that was not down to earth or willing to learn would not have been able to discover this book, talk more of the recipes. So I really liked the premise of the book. The plot was not even very thick or twisted. It was just straightforward. But the topic that was explored, having empathy, being observant, sensitive to the feelings of others, being there for others and being willing to help them was just what was explored in this short story. This is a story that you can actually listen to within an hour and it is over. But I actually enjoyed it. So now, last but not the least, I'm going to talk about the only physical book that I actually read in the month of July. So just like I said, I was able to read only one physical book in the month of July. So the book I was able to read is Scubart's Songs. So this is his Scubert Songs. He said a biographical study by Dietrich Fischer de Scow, and it was translated from German by Kenneth S. Witten. So, for those that are into classical music, I'm sure they must have come across this name, Scubert. Actually, subconsciously, I have heard it. It's not as if I'm a big fan of music. I love classical music, but I enjoy it when it's played and all that. There was even a program on our local radio station that is classical music all through, and they play it around 6 in the evening. So I always look forward to it. It was very calming for me at the end of a very busy day. So I came across this book, non-fiction, of course, which I love to read. So it's a Scribert song. So he's basically the Scow, or Fisher the Scow, basically. Some people say he's the best known expert on Schubert. So Schubert is an Austrian composer that lived in the 1800s. So in Vienna, that is Austria. So at the time that he was alive, Vienna was like the music capital of Europe or something like that, and classical music was the thing then, back then. Basically, he was he concentrated mainly on lades, what they call lades, as in Lied, or folk songs. So basically, back then, somebody would write a poem and then give it to a composer, somebody that had a musical gift or was versed in composing music like Qbert, to set that poem to music. So the person will set it and then it will become palatable, to become very, very enjoyable to listen to. So that was basically what Qbert did. So from reading the book, I got to learn that from a very young age, he started composing. He went to will I say, a boarding school, a scholarship institution known as the Convict, which he was admitted into on scholarship because of his music talent. He had to attend an exam, and then his talent was noticed. His father actually took him there, and then he was picked, and then he became a student of the Convict on scholarship. So right then in the Convict, as a teenager, he started writing compositions for poems, but he dared not allow his father to hear about it because his father was against his musical career. His father did not want to hear of it because back then you were expected to grow up and start a family as soon as possible. And making money from music back then was not something that was heard of. It was not, you basically had to be very big and patronized by royalty, emperors, kings to make any meaningful living out of music. But this young guy, Schubert, and his name was Franz Schubert, he loved his composition. He used to compose in secret. So this biographical story takes us through how he basically grew up as a teenager, the things that happened to him because of the choices he made to stick with the talent that God gave him as a composer. It was not easy for him. For many, many, many years, he was not earning money from his musical talent, but he kept on composing. And to the extent that he's one of his well-known compositions, which people go crazy over today, was actually rejected by a well-known composer in his day and described as nonsense. But that did not make him to give up on his dream, on his compositions, and today he's well celebrated. So I really, really enjoyed reading this book. Number one, it was well researched, copious amounts of references. There is even a page where a list of his songs and the years they were written in you'll find at the end of the book. And then there is also a note about the author. And one thing I liked that the author really did is for each song, he basically, will I say, brought us into the world, number one, generally, of what was going on, maybe in Austria or in Germany or in Europe at that time. And then secondly, into the world of Schubert, what was going on in his life at that time, which most of these things served as inspiration for the kind of music that he set to these poems, and even some of the poems that he wrote for himself. He even went into the detail of who are those that wrote the poems that he accepted and set and composed into music. Most of the poems were from his friends, his close friends. Then other ones were from his acquaintances, associates, that people that heard his compositions and liked it, sent poems to him and he accepted and composed. Some were from other well-known poets of his time, like Virgil and all that. So, and then some of the poems, he actually liked the poets and then he requested for their poems so that he could set them to music. Then some actually, many were influenced by events in his life at that time, like when his mother died. We are told in this book that his mother died of typhoid fever, which in today's day and age might sound unbelievable to some people, but back then it was a thing. Even Schubert himself died of typhoid fever at a very young age of 30 something. I think he was 36 or 38, I'm not sure right now. So when some of his siblings died, because at that time infant mortality was very, very high. I think his mother gave birth to 14 children, and in the end 5 survived out of the whole number, and it was a normal thing. There was no cause for alarm. So it's basically, and then when he had a disagreement with his father, because at a time when it became obvious to the father that he was not going to give up his musical career, his father basically wanted him to be a teacher, a school teacher, because his father was a school teacher and he had gone up the ranks, so he wanted his sons. Some of his sons actually took up after him. But even though Schubert was a school teacher, but he did not give up on his musical career. So his father banned him from the house. He had a disagreement with his father and they were not friends at all for some years. So there were songs that he wrote during those years, and the influence of the strain of the father-son relationship was obvious in his songs. And then even during times of political unrest, his death of his friends, missing his friends when he traveled to a far place, all those things influenced his choice of music to set to these poems. So this book is a book I would highly recommend to people that are pursuing a particular path in life, especially gifted people. Something you are gifted, you came to the world with this thing, and then it seems as if it is not working out right, especially in this day and age of we want to make $1 million in 1 week. You go online, you see people claiming they did this and did that, and then nobody wants to do the grind, bend down, do the work. It is not always easy. It is not always, at least at the very beginning, before you are known. Reading throughout this book, you see series of trials and failures, hit and misses for these Schubert that today his name is basically known all over the world. But at the beginning, it was not like that for him. I had read almost half of the book because before I came to a paragraph that said, for the first time, Schubert's song was performed in public or something. I was like, what's all these years? So what has been happening? And he has been composing. At that point, we had basically talked about more than 50 of his songs. So I was like, what has he been doing all along all these years? So you get to see that it took him a lot of patience, a lot of endurance, a lot of perseverance, a lot of grit to actually stick to his guns and then make something of these gifts. That's God. So basically, maybe in another video, I'm going to talk about an in-depth the things that really were written in this book, this biographical study of Scuba's songs. So the friendships he had to make, the things that basically shaped him as a man and shaped his music. And of course, there was an element of romance. He found love, but guess what? Because he could not make money as a musician, in those days, people did not basically marry for love, they were practical. So because he could not fend for these girls or these women that came into his life, they loved him quite alright, but they basically had to go and marry somebody else. And then he was left to lick his wounds. If it were in our day and age, maybe they will take their chances and elope or something. But back then, no. You had to be practical. So it was really a study in. It's a book I would actually recommend to, as I said before, gifted or young people that are just starting out in life. Know that it is not going to be easy out there in the wild world, but don't give up on your dreams, on your talents. Stick to it, and it will pay off in the end. So, guys, those were the things I was able to read or consume in the month of July. How was your July? Please chat me up in the comments. And if there's any book that you recommend for me to read in the month of August, please do so. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to support the channel. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.